But I mean, one-on-one is easy.
Yeah. Okay, let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us on this ET Now Rise with India webinar. I am Nayantara Rai. My guest today is none other than the famous economist Swaminathan Aiyar. You read his columns regularly in Times of India and Economic Times. He is in Washington, D.C., but the Swanomics special on this webinar. Swami, first up, thank you so much for joining us here on the ET Now webinar. You're, of course, in Washington, D.C., but you're tracking everything that happens in India. I know very, very closely. You read the column, as always. I'm going to go through some of them, but the first question I want to ask you is that everybody has been waiting for that fiscal stimulus act package. It's missing in action. We don't know when it's going to come out. We don't know why the government is also waiting for it. What you've seen today so far is about what, 0.8% of the GDP, which, as you said in your one column, is paltry, it's peanuts. How big a stimulus package is even needed? The one in the US, which involved injecting a full Indian economy, is already exhausted.
I mean, dead right. I immediately wrote that, the so-called stimulus, it just crumbs from a miser's table. I mean, this is ridiculous. In the United States, the first package was almost 10% of GDP, and there's going to be a second package and maybe a third package. There are other countries, Japan and so on. Everybody is going for stimuluses of 10-15%. And please understand, in many cases, this will not be a stimulus. Despite spending this money, GDP will go down. I mean, the word stimulus normally means that you go up. So this is not even it's a wrong word. It is desperate damage control money. And why India has not gone on a more adventurous route, I do not know. What has happened with both Urjit Patel, especially Urjit Patel and Raghu Rajan, two former RBI governors, they have given a warning that, if you go on a big spending spree, they say India's fiscal deficit was already large. If you now have a situation of a very large new deficit, which is done basically by printing money, India may lose its credit level rating with international agencies. And if India is then downgraded to junk, and there is a huge outflow of money out of India, this is something India should worry about. Well, I would agree. It's something that every country has to worry about. It's not an Indian worry. And I would say it's something that everybody has to worry about. I would worry less than anybody else because we are all in the same boat. And if everybody else is having a big stimulus, why not us? So I would say that the RBI needs to be adventurous. We need to monetize very large deficits. I had said that money in Jan Dhan accounts can be tripled immediately, later on quintupled. Arvind Subramanian has put forward an idea of, okay, let's have 10 lakh crores. It's like 5% of GDP. Yeah. I mean, you can start with that. But I would say above all, the stimulus, this is damage control, this is not a stimulus. The only way the biggest stimulus will be to restart the economy and ease off the lockdown. I mean, you have to enable enterprises to work. I mean, just shoveling out a little money, this is like saying, okay, you missed a meal, so here is a crumb or two. This is not reviving the economy. This is going to worsen the situation. So it's all very well to say, I have a lockdown for 3 weeks. I have a lockdown for 6 weeks. But you have to restart the economy.
But Swami, in your not the last column, last column, your last column was dedicated to China and the policy action that has been taken. I'll get to that in a bit. You have made a case where you have said that the prolonged lockdown will in fact kill more people and make more people miserable than the lives that are saved from the lockdown. That it can make India have the worst economy it's ever had in modern times, in independent India. That forget 1991, we could have a worse growth rate than that. On what basis are you arriving at this decision? I want to understand that, because if you look at the Reserve Bank of India, for example, it has held off on making a projection saying now is not the time to do it. We just don't have enough parameters or a big enough crystal ball that we can gaze into and figure it out.
I would agree that any projection is hazardous. It depends on whether you expect a V-shaped recovery. whether in the second half of the year, we have no idea. I mean, the history of previous viruses is that it would come back in a second wave in November.
Hmm.
I mean, if that happens, all bets are off. So, the assumptions matter. One hard data that we have from CMI is that unemployment has gone from 8% to 26%. Please don't tell me that when unemployment goes from 8 to 26%, that the economy is going to be growing or something. It is a disastrous drop. Disastrous. And that's why I said the biggest stimulus is to get India back to work. For that, what matters is not just the survival of individuals, but the survival of enterprises. This is the point that Pranab Roy, our former chief statistician, has made very strongly. I mean, 65% of our enterprises are small fellows, and they have been cut off from finance, they have been cut off from supplies. So
Yeah.
if you try to push money out through the banks, that is not going to work. The banks are risk averse. The banks are afraid, especially the public sector banks, of so many fiascos. They say, I may be arrested for not having looked properly into a thing. This will become another Nirav Modi scandal. And the banks only want to push out money to the big boys. If you want to get to the 65 million smaller enterprises, it has to be through the NBFCs and through the MFIs, the microfinance institutions. These are the last mile people. As of now, all the RBI has said is, okay, told the banks that if you lend a little more, I give you some cheap refinance. Will this be enough? I would say definitely not.
Hmm.
Most definitely not. I think the only way to get money out to the grassroots is for the RBI to devise mechanisms for directly financing the NBFCs and MFIs and encouraging them to the maximum possible. Secondly, one reason why banks are reluctant to lend is they know that many of these loans cannot be repaid in this very, very difficult condition. Especially if you continue to have a lockdown for 6 months, 8 months, 9 months, especially if there is a second wave of the virus that comes, as many people are saying, they think many of these loans will not be repaid. I would say you need a government guarantee of 100% for at least 3 months. Then they will push the money out, saying, then I'm not losing the bank the money. Then the CVC will not come after me. The CBI will not come after me. I and my wife and my children will not all be in jail. So, you need to have an aggressive government policy of guarantees. This is being done in some countries like the UK. They say that, in effect, it will mean it is deficit financing. In effect, the government will end up paying, but the money is enabled to go directly to the enterprises. The government doesn't have the capacity to itself just give money to the enterprises, but through the lending system and then forgiveness. Now, in many cases, this is linked to.
I have to interrupt you. आप मुझे एक चीज बताइए. Right now, who will take loans? Who wants loans? Who wants to add another headache of credit? They don't know धंधा रहेगा. Why will they take more loans?
You take loans because working capital is the need of the hour. When you have a shutdown, you suddenly find that, I do not have my cash flow. I am no longer selling my goods. I am no longer selling my services. Meanwhile, I have all kinds of fixed costs. I may have salary costs. I may have inventory holding costs. So I desperately need working capital. Working capital is the lifeblood of small enterprise. I remember after the 1992 riots in Bombay, there were vegetable sellers, they were asking for, can you please lend me 50 rupees so that I can buy some potatoes and sell them on the market. I mean, even 50 rupees of working capital was enough for a potato seller to restart business. So working capital is desperately needed when you have had the shutdown and you have finished off the livelihoods of so many people. They have fixed costs, but without the working capital, they cannot continue. That is why the money is needed. Forget about fresh investment. We are not talking about greenfield investments. We are talking about the need for working capital in a desperate situation.
Because it's not like they will operate with 100% capacity, right? It will start small, baby steps. That's why also I was asking. And in that situation where this economy is going to be so bad, people will be spending less, unemployment is going on, salary cuts are being announced. So I thought taking a loan would be the last thing on any small businessman's mind.
No, you need the thing simply to stay alive. As I said, we have to save not only lives, we have to save enterprises. I mean, if out of 65 million, 30 million go bust, The long-term impact on the economy is dreadful. The long-term economy on employment, on livelihoods, and ultimately on lives.
Yeah.
So, you need to understand that if the enterprises die, the humans will not live. So to keep the enterprises alive, you need to send this money out. It is a line, it is a lifeline that will keep them going till such time as the lockdowns ease and the economy returns closer to normal. Until that particular period, just as you have to give money to the hungry, to the migrant workers, you give some food to them that they are alive until once again the economy revives. Enterprises require food in the form of working capital exactly as the workers require it for their stomachs.
Do you think the government perhaps has not announced a fiscal package? It's announced one only so far. 0.8% of the GDP is for the bottom of the pyramid because it doesn't know like how long the lockdown will be. We don't know what will happen on 3rd May, how partial, how much, in what staggered way it'll increase the lockdown. So it's scared not of the unknown, but we need bravado right now, right? We need the unimaginable. Or do you think what they're doing is wise? Pretty much along what Ujjit Patel said, you can't have your fiscal deficit go out of whack, or the other former RBI governor, Raghuram Rajan, raising a red flag. Do you think we're spending too much time focusing on those arguments, worrying too much about artificial lines like fiscal deficit targets?
Absolutely. You can say that, okay, we don't know which paths the virus is going to take. Neither did the USA, neither did the UK, Japan. And those countries have put out 10, 12, 13, 14% of their GDP in new packages. You do not have to be a genius to know that 0.8% is not enough. Any idiot will tell you that. So if you are not doing it, I have no idea why not. And the idea that do you know if you do this, India might lose its credit rating. I think it's a very weak argument. In the first place, I don't think it will happen because, when everybody is doing very large stimuli, I do not see that the rating agencies will penalize only one country. And we are fundamentally in much, much better shape. You look at Turkey or Argentina or Brazil, or, we are so much better off. And if they have not all been finished off, we shouldn't be worrying on that. So I am absolutely puzzled as to why Mr. Modi has not gone for a much, much bigger package already and put much, much more money directly into the Jan Dhan bank accounts. There are very few developing countries which actually have the ability to push this money out into the accounts of the poor. We have managed to create this infrastructure. Why on earth are we not using it?
Because, Narendra Modi understands the pulse of the people, right? Like we keep saying that he's a political animal. He understands it. He's got a lot at risk. It was him who commanded the vote for the BJP. So he gets it. I'm sure he understands the displeasure, the pain that the people are going through. So, and I'm being optimistic here. And I want to lean on your expertise and, all the years that you've been tracking the various governments. Do you think he's literally saving the best for last? Like he's saving it, trying to politically time it. But, they also say a stitch in time saves 9.
I will not pretend that I know Mr. Modi's mind. We are pals. We don't discuss matters. So I do not know what's going on in his mind. But from what I know of him, I'm really surprised that the package is so small and that we have not had a second package. I see no particular merit in trying to string this out in little stimulus packages every 3 months. You need the money in a huge amount immediately. As I said, those enterprises, if they've already died after 3 months, the idea that, after 4 months, I'm going to give you a helping hand, it does not work. You need it right now. This is why the huge amounts that were put out by the Small Business Administration in the United States of America, and the money was gone in a fortnight.
What?
The money is needed now, for heaven's sake, not later. Not in dribs and drabs, and in massive quantities.
What can be done for the salaried class? We've talked about bottom of the pyramid. Typically, we do see dole-outs when it comes to farmers. I'm sure after those horrific images that we saw with migrant labor, those incentives are also going to come. What is it that can be done for the middle class, according to you? Because they will not be part of the Jan Dhan program, for example. They will be also the ones who are going to lose their jobs. They're also typically your taxpayers, right? we keep talking about rewarding the taxpayers. What can be done for them according to you?
Okay, I'm not quite sure the middle class is the tax because we are told only 4 million people pay income tax. Only 4% of people
Taxpayer is
pay
of
tax.
course a minority perhaps.
Yeah, well, okay. I mean, okay, the upper middle class does pay taxes. And as I said, what can be done for them? These are relatively well-off people. Many of them are salaried and have not lost their incomes. Many of those who are in business are, of course, in very dire straits. So mainly for them, you require a restarting of the economy itself. As I said, we cannot, it's time to forget about just the relief part of it. Uh, Relief is, I mean, everybody will say, okay, I will gird my loins for 6 weeks. Or, I will go through this thing for 2 months, 3 months. After that, what happens? I mean, do you really, does Mr. Modi really believe they're going to have fantastic V-shaped recovery and that the economy is going to take off after June? Nobody believes that. And epidemiologists are emphasizing the fact that you have to be prepared for a second wave, particularly as the normal influenza season comes along. So, this particular thing has to be taken into account. So why Mr. Modi has not done it, I cannot understand it. It seems to me that he has called upon people to make sacrifices. That is an example of good leadership, and people have made the sacrifices, as they have in country after country.
Yeah.
But a point will come when the rebellion will take place, when you are killing the entire economy. It is one thing to tighten my belt for 1 month, 2 months, but if this is going to continue for 1 year, because that's what's going to happen. I mean, if you kill all the enterprises, even if you solve the virus problem, your economy is in a complete and total shambles. So I said, don't just focus on the, how many people have died? 1,000 people. That is all. Our daily death rate is 3, 4, 5 times that much. So, every death is a tragedy, but coronavirus death is not more tragic than death from tuberculosis or malaria or any other, or any other disease. And the amount of attention we are focusing on this virus means that medical attention is being diverted from all the other diseases. This is not an Indian problem alone. This is a problem the world over. This is why in America they're discovering that the non-COVID deaths are almost if you look at the excess deaths, the non-COVID deaths are almost as much as the COVID deaths themselves. Because, the medical system itself is focusing too much on the coronavirus to the neglect of detection, diagnosis, and treatment of all the other diseases. And this, of course, is going to be doubly reinforced if you have say that people don't have incomes, people don't have jobs, people are unable to travel, clinics are unwilling to take you, all these factors. So we really need to restart the economy. We need to, instead of saying that, if the balance between risk and opening up the economy, it is obviously correct to say that if there is a huge outbreak of a virus, that area can be shut down. On the other hand, we need to be far more liberal in opening things up. We need to have highly imaginative ways of restoring travel. I mean, through appropriate spacing and equipment, whether it's bus, train, plane, whatever, we have to find innovative ways of restarting all these businesses. Without them, you cannot continue for more than a few months without completely wrecking the economy.
Because you brought up this entire point of how there is focus on coronavirus, and it's not like other diseases are not going away. In India, you've got the kind of very low mortality rate also when it comes to coronavirus. I'm going to go across to one of our participants who has asked a question. This is from Jehuramad Patankar, who has written in, healthcare stimulus to private hospitals would be a great boost to the economy. Virus may go eventually, but it's going to have a long-lasting effect, and consumption coming back is guaranteed. Scaling up hospitals, EMAS, PPE manufacturing capacity, retraining healthcare workers is also going to generate jobs. The fact is after coronavirus, whether in this wave, next wave, third wave, if you talk to psychologists, if you just talk to your friends, family, everybody, I think everybody's going to be obsessed, right, with sanitation, with hygiene, the quality of healthcare and all of that. So would you agree with this particular attendee of ours that we need to look at private healthcare a lot more? It is, of course, infrastructure being exposed. but should it also be a part of the stimulus package?
I would say in some sense it is part of the stimulus package. I keep insisting that we have to reach out to all the institutions, all the enterprises. When I say all the enterprises, it will obviously include hospitals. Uh, the plain and simple fact is that the government hospitals have never been remotely enough to cater to everybody. So people have often been going, very large numbers of people have been going to the private places for all kinds of ailments, and that will be the case here. But yes, we need to aggressively increase medical facilities. But as I said, not just for COVID, but for everything else. You cannot have a situation where the attention to COVID crowds out all the other diseases. So yes, we do need an expansion of uh, private health, public health, paramedical, uh, whatever it takes. Every possible niche needs to be explored. Every possible niche needs to be strengthened. And as I said, we need to devise ways of getting money out there, whether it is through NBFCs or what. Or again, a role has to be played. A significant amount of money should be grant money to the state governments. That the state governments can just push this grant money out in block grants to enable a certain amount of extra beds to be created, for emergency hospitals to be created. Uh, I mean, with a large tent, you can put up a very large number of beds. So as I said, there are all kinds of innovative ways we'll have to think of increasing the total number of beds. You cannot increase the total number of doctors quickly, but you can attempt to use paramedics more imaginatively to help the situation. And as I said, I keep emphasizing many more people are being killed by other ailments than by COVID. So for heaven's sake, don't say all this should be done only for COVID. It has to be done for public health.
Okay. So the other question I'm seeing a lot that we're getting here, so I'm going to club some of them, Sami, because there seems to be one theme that's coming, at least from two panelists I see on one window. This is from Prashant Manapure and one anonymous attendee who are asking as well, should India print more notes? This is from SK Bharti as well. Should India print more notes? Could some out of the box ideas like dipping into the forex reserves or monetization of temple gold also be done by the government? I don't know which government will ever have the political appetite to monetize temple gold. We keep hearing about it. It was talked so much in 2008 as well. But what about printing of notes? I can see a lot of questions coming in on that.
I would say that, you can attempt, I do not know enough of, there are government controls on temples. To what extent you can use that particular thing or borrow against gold and so on. You not, when say monetize gold, you don't necessarily have to sell it. You will be able to borrow against it. I have not gone into that issue. But all of these will fail into the ability of the RBI to just print money. I mean, when in the United States, when they say I'm going to have a deficit of 10% of GDP, are they looking into the gold holdings of the churches? Please no. I mean, you just print that money and the Fed will accommodate it. We need to be bold on this. Instead of pretending that the RBI cannot print, so let's look for all these other things like temple gold. I would say just say RBI can do it. You can do it in the form of, I don't know, you can call it coronavirus bonds or special bonds. So this is a one-time thing. I remember many years ago when we had a sharp increase in oil prices, there was an issue of oil bonds, which became an off-budget item. It did not show up as a central government deficit, even though the RBI was financing them. So if you could have the oil bonds off budget, okay, have coronavirus bonds off budget, but get the RBI to finance, because the sums required are such that the central bank needs to step in and do it. That is what is being done with massive deficits the world over. So please let us not confuse this with issues like temple gold and pitching various other sources of revenue. I would agree that you need to tap every single source, but these other sources will absolutely fail in comparison with the printing press of the RBI.
But if the RBI were to print money, and there is an argument for that, considering our currency is also benchmarked, let's say against the US dollar and all of that, which are printing far more. Look what's happening in Japan and Europe as well. What about inflation? Or is that a devil you worry about later? You first think about survival and then revival.
at a time when demand is collapsing and GDP is probably minus 5%,
Yeah.
the idea that you will get inflation is laughable. Or let me put it this way. When you have a supply crisis, those things which are not being supplied because of the lockdown may go up in price. But that is the cause of the lockdown, not of the money. The real problem, in fact, is if there is a lockdown and no goods are moving and are being produced, even if you want to spend money, you may find that the shops don't have those particular goods. So I said, inflation is not a worry. Now, we have experience in many countries by now who have had a huge increase in printing money for the last 2 months. Have they suffered a sharp rise in inflation? Is there any inflation in the USA, in the UK, in Japan? The answer is no. So it's very, very clear from international experience, you can print a very large amount of money in these circumstances without getting inflation. Now, you may say India is slightly different. Maybe in India we get some more inflation than the other countries. I don't doubt it. But the inflation I am worried about is more the inflation caused by the lockdown, caused by the stoppage of transport, caused by the stoppage of the production of goods and the supply of goods. So the supply, as I said, we need to restart the economy. If you do not restart the economy, then there's going to be a huge shortage of everything, and to that extent prices would go up. So
Yeah.
I said the focus should not be worrying about whether that money will be inflationary. Secondly, suppose the money is inflationary, so what? I mean, during the world wars, which some people ask are comparable, inflation is a silent tax on people. Through inflation, the government is able to spend without a direct tax. So there is a sacrifice being asked of the people. So when Mr. Modi is asking people for sacrifices on all kinds of other ways through the lockdown, what is the problem in asking for a little sacrifice via inflation, which would be far simpler to administer and does not require migrant workers to go home. It does not require 1,000 kinds of disruption. So yes, it is a form of sacrifice and a worthwhile one.
Migrant labor as well. This is, of course, the big story tonight here in India. The Home Ministry has come out with a circular saying migrant labor that is stranded can now even move across the borders. Buses will have to be provided. These will be for the migrant labor that are not showing symptoms, and the state is going to check them and all of that. The very fact that the Home Ministry has come out with this circular and it's coming ahead of the 3rd May lockdown deadline, I don't want to get into speculation of what this means. You're going to see more opening up of the activity, but the very fact that you're allowing migrant labor to open up, you've talked about construction in the past, infrastructure, all of that. It seems to be coming together, right?
I am sorry, I am not anywhere near as optimistic. To me, the very first thing you would need to do is make the announcement of a huge increase in government spending. That huge increase in government spending should be directed, among other things, to state, directly to the accounts of the poor. Huge additional amount to state governments to enable them to carry out the huge amount to the medical system to enable it to come out. I am not seeing any of that. And plus, that the lockdown should be eased more aggressively. I would say that, open up as many enterprises as possible and only shut those where you get an outbreak. So instead of saying that I will allow you to open, allow everybody to open and shut down those where you see a problem. I think you need to be far more aggressive in the opening up of enterprises, and you need to be far more aggressive, as I said, in seeing that the money directly gets to the enterprises instead of just saying, the Reserve Bank will give some additional window to the banks. And the plain fact is that the banks are not going to do the lending for the last mile. So everything that's happening right now, to me, looks pretty disastrous. The government is not doing enough. The RBI is not doing enough. The banks are not doing enough. The states are not doing enough. So I don't think things are coming together at all. I'm a very depressed man.
Yeah, maybe I want to be optimistic. Let me put it this way. I'm still in my 30s. I want to be optimistic. I'm not taking a dig, but I'm always accused of being optimistic. I'm hoping. Let me put it this way. But Swami, when we're talking about this, I'm going to quote from your column. You wrote, conventional recessions can be tackled by loose fiscal and monetary policy. These will not work when fear drives the slowdown, unquote. This was, I think, on 15th of March. But what has changed since 15th of March, where you're now advocating very loose fiscal policy, or is it just a case of it doesn't matter about anything else. This is the only thing that we can do and we have to do.
No, I have no doubt that no matter what stimulus you give, fear will be a problem. If people are afraid to go out to the market, if people are afraid to go and rejoin their factory, that obviously then diminishes the extent of the rebound. So yes, fear will, but so the government, as I said, needs to make these provisions. You need to devise forms of transport with distance in between so that people can move. Right now, people are very afraid of going on a crowded bus or in a crowded train. So fear will come in the way. You need to devise ways of overcoming that particular fear.
Right. And but because fear is also going to be driving the economy, and when I talk to, for example, infrastructure players, when I talk to real estate companies as well, their one big fear also is that the labor will not come back till perhaps after the monsoon, because you're seeing dole-outs by the government. You've seen that as part one, the first phase of the fiscal package that the finance minister has announced, and also I don't think we perhaps treated the migrant labor with the kind of dignity one should have. So the fear of industry also is that you're not going to have the migrant labor coming back to work till after the monsoon.
Well, I don't think that the monsoon is the critical thing. The fear has to go. The fear of that, you will be unemployed, you won't be able to eat. There is a fear of working together with people in various ways because you have not worked out social distancing for work. We have to innovate all these things. I do not think this will take place fast. The emphasis on the monsoon is overdone. Yes, construction goes down during the monsoon. But right now, let us see where is the place to live in, whether the food is there, the income is there, and the jobs are there. Until the economy restarts, there is no question of people coming back. There is no question even of construction alone going up. The construction has a particular problem. I would say that the construction industry is among the least likely to bounce back. Because, the real estate, buying a new house is something that can always be put off. You might even say that now that we've learned about distance working, the demand for office space will go down a lot. You might say, why do I need a new office? We will do this by teleworking. So I would not look upon real estate as a particularly strong area for a bounce back. The other areas I think would be...
Infrastructure projects.
Huh?
What about infrastructure projects?
No, infrastructure needs to go ahead, and it depends. Many kinds of infrastructure. It should be entirely possible to revive that kind of construction and have people with protective gear and social distancing. If you're building a road, if you're building a bridge, there is no reason why it's not possible to restart all these things. So I said I would be in favor of an aggressive restarting of all these projects, with people devising ways of ensuring safety, and close them down only when something goes wrong, rather than say I'm closing everything down and then I will decide case by case, okay, I will allow this, I will allow this. I would reverse the emphasis, because we must restart the economy, and if we do not restart the economy, everything else will fail.
Okay. Everything else is going to fail. In fact, if some of you have not read Swaminathan Aiyar's column, he has raised an entire point about how you will kill more people, make more people miserable with this lockdown, perhaps have the worst growth rate than even 1991 when India went bust. We're of course waiting for the unimaginable by the team of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as well as Nirmala Sitharaman. And whatever's announced, Swami, is perhaps the expectations will not be met, right? Every stakeholder believes that I am the most important participant in the economy, whether it is the migrant labor, the farming sector, the services sector, retail sector, manufacturing sector. What would you say are the most important areas that deserve the thrust of the government at the moment? It's not possible for the government to bankroll everybody, right? So the priorities have to change. And when they prioritize, they reprioritize, what should be right on top?
Now, the bottom of the pyramid was necessary, and on Jan Dhan account you could put much, much more money. And that's easily done because you have a system that works. Enterprises have to get the working capital. For that, I said money needs to be pushed directly to NBFCs, MFIs. Government guarantee needs to be given for banks to lend to these people. So that's the priority which covers a huge, these are very broad brush areas. Beyond that, I think huge additional amounts to state governments to enable them to manage all this, because the last mile, at the end of it all, if I'm putting up additional tents for additional beds, this is not going to be done by a central government official. It has to be done at the state level. In the United States, again, if you look at their packages, huge additional sums are being given to state governments. So, money has to, and with a focus on the medical system, uh, the issue of restarting, you will find the world over, the lockdown is being eased. Country after country, New Zealand particularly has almost lifted its stuff. So, everybody realizes that it's time to get back to work. So there is there are a very large number of priorities. There is not just one. I've already named 4 or 5, and I could name another 4 or 5 in turn. But I would say these are the big ones. Keep the people alive through Jan-Dhan, give the enterprises alive through working capital, restart life, restart economic activity, because that is the only thing which is actually a stimulus. Everything else is trying to do some repairing the damage of the lockdown. Repairing the damage of the lockdown is not the same as lifting the economy again. So we cannot live on charity for more than a small amount of time. So please let us get going again, and let us be prepared to live with this virus for up to 2 years. I mean, I'm sorry to sound pessimistic, but when I read some of the epidemiology, the idea of a second wave and of a third wave, that every time it will come again. So people who seem to think that this is a nice 1.5, 2 month affair, and suddenly the economy takes off after July. I think that is outrageously optimistic.
Yeah, there are 3 COVID cases, and if you want to know what the 3 COVID cases are, here's a plug for Swaminathan Aiyar's blogs. You can go on the Times of India and Economic Times website and read it. He has talked about the 3 COVID cases. Swaminathan Aiyar, I'm getting so many questions, and we've touched upon it, but clearly a lot of people still want to know more about MSMEs. I can count at least 6 questions that have come in as far as MSMEs go, saying what to do for MSMEs. There are no income coming in, yet the state directives are there that they have to pay their wages. They're not allowed to fire at the moment. There is absolutely no demand. We already touched about the bank and MSMEs relationship and how they're just not able to even get refinancing or working capital. So what does it have to be? Does it have to be the kind of noise we've been hearing, 3 lakh crore rupee credit scheme for MSME, or some government fund that they can go to get working capital?
Well, I think I would have to repeat what I've said. I mean, it's a very important part of it, and the banks are reluctant to lend. So the banks should get a full sovereign guarantee. That is, this particular sums are not repaid. Then the government will make it good. And then the banks will not be accused of corruption. They will not be accused of a Nirav Modi trick of giving money to the unworthy and being highly corrupt. And you would need to push out much more money through the NBFCs and through the MFIs. And perhaps you would need to give some measure of sovereign guarantee for those people lending as well. So you really need to push the money out in every which way. But I said, above all, restart the economy. The problem of MSME is not just lack of a worker or lack of transport. Is there? If everybody tries to restart, will there be demand in the economy? You'll find that the stuff cannot be transported. I cannot get my raw materials. I cannot get my workers. So, you need to normalize the economy. Without normalizing the economy, you cannot normalize MSMEs. They are an integral part of a whole. They are small parts of an integral whole.
Okay. So that is the recommendations that are coming in as far as MSMEs go. But who's going to create the demand, Swami? Because we're going to see consumerism come to a standstill. Disposable income, discretionary spending is going to come down. Narendra Modi has declared war. He did that in his first televised public address. So when we fight this war, does the government also have to do what we have seen in previous instances of post-war? Look at Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. Is it going to have to be this government perhaps giving large orders, whether it's to textile companies, whether it's to, let's say, railways or to infrastructure companies, just to kickstart the economy? Shouldn't that also be part of it? The government putting the bill and placing orders because they don't exist?
No, please, words like kickstart are very silly when we consider that what's happening is that if you're trying to drive a car, there are 20 hurdles put by the government. Then kickstarting will get you nowhere because of all the hurdles. So I said the lockdown has to be lifted. There is no way people are suddenly going to start and get going if they have all these obstacles on the way. That's why I said you need to be.
No, what
Uh,
I'm trying to ask you is that post the
no, there
lockdown,
are two things. When
not so
one
much that you
when
have
in
to
any
follow.
big recession, when there's a fall in demand, the appropriate way is to make it up by having a large amount of additional government spending.
Yeah.
Which is why we are all talking about aggressively increase the fiscal deficit.
Hmm.
And Varun Subramaniam says 5% of GDP. I'm willing to go along with that. So let us have aggressive additional government spending. That is an important part of it. But I said the spending also assumes that there is a production of goods and availability of goods in the shelves, which will not be there as long as you have a very severe lockdown. So I said you need to devise clever ways in which stuff can be transported, people can be transported, life can return to normal. I think we also need to perhaps start thinking not just in terms of regions but in terms of age groups. What's very clear, I mean, if you look at the Western examples, they may not be fully appropriate for India where nutrition is poorer. But the fatality level for people under the age of 18 is extremely low, close to zero. People from 18 to 45 is again very, very low. The real problem arises with people above the age of 50. I think more than 95% of the cases are above the age of 50. And of course, above the age of 60 and 70, it becomes more and more. So then the question arises, the emphasis on closing schools and colleges. You need to take a look at this. Are we overdoing this? Because are these the centers of infection? If these people actually have a very low fatality risk. Now, some people will argue that even if they don't have a fatality risk, they can become carriers. They don't have the symptoms, but they are carrying the disease. And for that reason, you have to shut them down. Maybe. But I would say in terms of returning to work with social distancing, uh, you could, I think, definitely say that people below the age of 50 should be hired and allowed to move freely because yes, there is some risk, but where is there not risk? I mean, every year we kill 4,000 people on the Mumbai's metropolitan railways alone. Are you aware of that? I mean, there are people in the electricity industry. They die of electric shocks. So there are occupational hazards which are killing people all the time. So yes, there will be additional hazard in the case of COVID. But if you are under the age of 50, it would appear that the risk element is no more than you might have in coal mining or one of those more hazardous industries where you do have relatively high death rates. So perhaps we need to look at the age aspect when we look at the opening up and say that, we can be more lenient for people below the age of 50.
Yeah, that's a great point actually you're making, because then we've seen a lot of hardship that, for example, even senior citizens have had to go through. So I know they may not contribute to the economy in that sense, but they need to be looked after perhaps by the state as well. There've been some horrific stories that we've been hearing about what exactly has been going on. Swami, maybe the only advantage that we can have of a late fiscal package is that we can learn from other countries. I think that can be the only silver lining if I want to look at a silver lining. For example, you're in the United States, $2.3 trillion fiscal stimulus package. Look what they do for the airlines, and then those airlines go and they sack the employees. Why did they take those grants in the first place? So what would you say are some of the lessons that we can see from whether it's the United States or Germany and Singapore, and make sure we don't repeat those mistakes?
The lessons are very different depending on where you look. I mean, the outstanding example in some sense is Sweden. We said no lockdown, but we will have social distancing, we will have people following things. And if you look at their excess mortality, the excess mortality is only 18%. I mean, there was an article in the Financial Times. Excess mortality in Sweden is only 18%, when the average for Europe and all the countries that they covered was 49%. So it would appear that if you keep things going, even if there are additional COVID deaths, you don't get so many non-COVID deaths.
Yeah.
So in other words, one lesson is don't focus so much on COVID and don't get that worried about only the COVID thing, because there are these other issues. The lockdown itself creates a certain number of deaths. Beyond that, I think it's the lesson that you certainly get is that you can have very, very huge spending packages, very, very huge deficits, and you will not get inflation. So I think this particular lesson has to be absolutely clear that this is a completely bogus threat and you should not be worrying about this. It has also become clear that you have to send money out to state governments, to local governments, and to the health centers. In other words, it's not just enough to say let them fend for themselves. Or there is a finance commission which will distribute money between center and states. Additional sums need to go down at the provincial level, city level, local level. Uh, that has come out very clearly. Other thing that has come out very clearly is that you give these small business loans. In the first place is all the bigger guys hog the money. Not enough gets through to the smaller fellows. It also turns out that no matter what you offer, it gets finished in no time. Because the working capital requirement, if a man pays salaries, rents, and other overheads, money is huge. So the support required by small enterprises is enormous. That's a very clear lesson from other countries. And we have not internalized it or done anything specific. What the RBI has done so far is not remotely enough.
And the RBI, in fact, is the one wing of the government, an autonomous wing of the government, which has been coming out with certain measures, whether it's a moratorium or whether you think, or even if you look at the attempt at the TLTRO, where we saw that the banks are certainly being very, very risk averse. What would you want the RBI to do? Do you think RBI, which is now sitting on lifetime high forex reserves, needs to use those, tap into them to fund the deficit? Because the
forex
elections are going to go down. There is no visibility on that front.
Foreign exchange reserves are not relevant. You can print money. The foreign exchange reserves are technical parlance would be called purchase. Rupees used to buy the dollars. So, where did those rupees come from? They came from the printing press. That same printing press. So you don't have to look to the reserves. We do not have a balance of payments crisis. Understand that. This is not a balance of payments crisis. It's a completely internal shutdown created crisis. So RBI has no problems there. Now RBI, for instance, told the banks, you may give a moratorium. What do you mean you may give a moratorium? You say you shall give a moratorium. Then the blame comes on the RBI if there is massive default. Right now in the banks, everybody is worried about losing his job and being treated like Chanda Kochar or other bankers who have been sacked. So you need to be far. The RBI should have been aggressive and said you shall give a moratorium. There should have been far more. And again, if the RBI thinks that by pushing money through the banks, it will get to the NBFCs and MFIs, it is not going to happen. We'll have to find some ways of directly financing those people. Maybe saying you make the loan, securitize it, and the RBI itself will buy those loans. In other words, the RBI will be taking out a lot of risk, but that risk is no different from printing money. So I would say that, the RBI needs to act on all these fronts, that as of now, understand that you are not pushing out enough money. Understand that giving liquidity to the banks is not going to solve the problem, because the banks are not going to be able to lend it on to all the people who really need it. Then you also need to understand that a lot of this money you're giving out is not going to be repaid. Therefore, it requires a sovereign guarantee, so it ultimately becomes the responsibility of the government. Otherwise, don't expect that.
Sorry? So why not look at something more innovative? Why not, for example, have a window where you waive off the interest, or the sovereign takes the guarantee for the interest for, let's say, a year or 2 years? Because the fact is, right now, a guy is worried about paying an EMI, is worried about wages, and you can't afford to default on the interest, because then you become a default and you're never going to get another loan again. So those kind of tools also.
The communication got interrupted out there. I'm sorry, I couldn't get it. Can you just quickly repeat that?
Am I audible to you now? Is this audible?
Yes, it's better now.
Yeah. So I was asking you that while you're looking for more aggression and a credit sovereign guarantee, why not get the government to also maybe look at guaranteeing the existing interest payments? Perhaps, a 2-year moratorium on interest, because an SME, MSME, a person is very scared of doing that, meeting the interest payment, paying the wages, and all the other obligations.
All I can say is that you have to take a risk. I fully understand that there will be massive misuse of much of this money. But there is frankly massive misuse of so much of government money in any case. I'm not sure this will be more misused. But as long as you have the obligation that you can't sack your workers, as long as the man has to pay his rent, he has to pay the interest on his working capital, he has loans to repay for the machinery that he's bought. I mean, all this has to be financed in order to keep enterprises alive. As I said, you don't focus only on saving lives. You must save the enterprises. That is extremely important because they then, in turn, are supporting so many other lives. So because of that, be aggressive, take the losses, take it as part of, like in a war. I mean, if Mr. Modi says we are fighting a war, in a war there will be many battles which turned out to be truly stupid and you lost a lot of fellows. But I'm sorry, when you fight a war of that kind, you will lose some battles. You will have some fiascos. You must take that in your stride. It's part of the game.
We need to find our Normandy. We need to find that second front. With that, Swaminathan Aiyar, I'm going to thank you for taking the time out. It's been a very engaging 60 minutes. There's still questions that are coming in, so maybe we're going to have to schedule yet another webinar. But thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
And I'd like to thank all my attendees and panelists also for taking the time out and joining. Thank you. Good night.
Thank you.